Going into the second half of SEC play, what are the biggest concerns for this Texas football team?
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, the biggest concerns for Texas with 4 games left heading into the back half of SEC play. That'll be the first and the second segment. And then in the last segment, Pro Football Focus's latest mock draft. 3 Texas Longhorns projected to go in the first round, but one interesting omission. One player not listed as a first-round pick, at least according to Trevor Sikkema on Pro Football Focus's latest mock draft. We discuss all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, the biggest concerns for this Texas football team heading into the back half of the SEC play with 4 games left on the regular season schedule. Now, before I get into everything that's wrong with Texas, I guess over the next 2 segments, I have to give the disclaimers. The sky is not falling. Texas is still the number 7 team in the country. They're 7-1. They lost 1 game to a bona fide national championship contender in Georgia. Everything that they want to accomplish this season is still in front of them, right? In terms of getting to the SEC championship game, they'll likely control their own destiny if A&M continues to win. In that regard, they should be a playoff team based on everything we've seen. They still look like one of the best teams in the country, and they have every opportunity to go compete for a national championship. Had to get that all out the way, right, before I give the doom and gloom over the next 2 segments. But what we have seen over the last 2 weeks is some chinks in the armor, right? What we have seen over the last 2 weeks is some vulnerabilities with this Texas football team. The first 6 games, they looked like world beaters. No game was close, dominated their opponents, arguably were the best team in the country. And then you lose to Georgia in that fashion, 30-15. It didn't even feel that close, right? And then you're up 14 points against Vanderbilt and end up in an onside kick situation where you're fighting for your life at the end, right? So the last 2 weeks, Texas has not looked like they did the first 6 weeks. And if you want to continue to, win these games on your schedule, win out, make sure you get to the SEC championship game. And if you want to make sure that you are a bona fide championship contender, conference or national, then some things have to be cleaned up with this Texas football team. And that's what we're going to discuss today over the first 2 segments. I think the first thing is Steve Sarkisian and Quinn Ewers need to open this offense back up, right? When you think of the Steve Sarkisian offense, you think of the deep passes, the explosive plays, really making the defense defend the entire field, right? Using the entire field to make plays with the offense. And we have not seen that with Quinn Ewers at the helm this year in this Texas offense. We've seen it at times, but it's been very rare. What we're seeing with Quinn Ewers at quarterback in Steve Sarkisian's offense, with all of these playmakers on the outside that we talked about coming into the season, even without Isaiah Bond largely for the last 3 games, we're seeing a glorified dink and dunk offense. That's what we're seeing with Quinn Ewers and Steve Sarkisian. We are seeing a glorified dink and dunk offense. When you look at Quinn Ewers this year, his average depth of target, right? And so how far his target's going down the field is 5.9 yards. That is very pedestrian, and that's who he's been all season, right? It's not just a since Quinn Ewers has come back from injury thing, because his highest in any single game this year was the first game against Colorado State. It was 6.3, right? So Quinn Ewers is not pushing the ball down the field, but I want to put the responsibility on Steve Sarkisian and Quinn, because Quinn, what it looks like based on what I'm seeing, is looking at his first read. If it's not there, he's going check down, right? And then we're throwing a lot of screens and a lot of check down. So when you look at it against Vandy, 18 of his 37 passing attempts were 5 air yards or less, not 5 yards from the line of scrimmage or less, 5 air yards or less. Half of his passes are screens or checkdowns, right? And it doesn't look like he's even willing to push the ball down the field. Now, he did have the deep pass to DeAndre Moore. He had a deep, attempt to Ryan Wingo. So we did see a couple opportunities, but for the most part, he is not pushing the ball down the field. He is refusing to take deep shots in this offense when we all know, based on the talent we have and the person over there, Steve Sarkisian, scheming them up, we know that there are opportunities for deep passes in this offense. The problem is Quinn Ewers is not looking for them. I put some of the responsibility on Steve Sarkisian. Of course, you're going to call the screen passes. I have no problem with that. It's an extension of the running game. The running game has not been what we're used to seeing at the University of Texas this year. So those are necessary. And you do have the type of players that can break tackles and make plays on the outside. But he needs to get in Quinn Ewers' ear and tell him we need to take some of these deep opportunities. We need to open up the defense, which will help our run game and make them defend the entire field. He needs to tell Quinn, look, right here, we're going to take a shot. Because without it, Quinn is locked into making these safe, comfortable, quick passes. And Steve Sarkisian can talk all he wants about the defense that we're seeing, and that's why, we're running the type of offense that we are. But like I said, this has been Quinn Ewers in every single game this season. What's interesting is Arch Manning's numbers are completely different than Quinn's, right? When you look at the UTSA game where Quinn got injured, Quinn's average depth of target in that game was about 6 yards, right? So like I said, glorified dink and dunk. Arch Manning comes in the game. His average depth of target is 10.6 yards. Same play caller, same weapons, going against the same defense, and all of a sudden Arch Manning is pushing the ball down the field where Quinn Ewers is keeping everything safe and close to the line of scrimmage. Then in his first start against ULM, 14.7 average depth of target, right? So his average target went 15 yards in that game. Now, that's not always the answer, right? He only completed 52% of his passes. I believe had 2 interceptions in that game. So it doesn't mean he was efficient. But what it means is Arch Manning is coming in, identifying opportunities to push the ball down the field, and he is doing just that while Quinn Ewers is choosing to play it safe and limiting this offense. And then against Mississippi State, he had 8.7. So even in Arch Manning's lowest average depth of target game, it was still 2.5 yards higher than Quinn Ewers' best game, right? And you can't convince me that Steve Sarkisian is just calling completely different plays for Arch Manning than he is for Quinn Ewers. The fact of the matter is Quinn Ewers is playing it safe. He is refusing to throw the ball down the field, and it is limiting this Texas offense this season. Steve Sarkisian needs to get in his ear and tell him we have opportunities on the outside, and you need to take advantage of them. And we need to stop throwing all of these screens and checkdowns when we have some of the best playmakers in the country getting open down the field. Next thing I want to talk about is turnovers, right? We are committing entirely too many turnovers. When you look at it, the Texas defense this year has been one of the best in the country, 9th in the country this season in terms of forcing turnovers. They forced 17 turnovers in 8 games. They've been absolutely phenomenal in terms of getting the ball back to our offense. But we don't have one of the best turnover margins in the country, even though we're one of the best teams in the country at forcing turnovers. So this Texas defense has forced 17 turnovers this season, but Texas has given the ball away 14 times in 8 games. We only have a turnover margin of +3, which is, I think, 37th in the country. So how backwards is that? That we're 9th in the country in forcing turnovers, but because we turn the ball over so much as an offense, we are only 37th in turnover margin, right? We need to stop giving the ball away. And when you look at it, Quinn Ewers this season in 5.5 games, right? Or less than 5.5, whatever you want to consider UTSA, he's thrown 6 interceptions and then has 2 fumbles. Okay. Last year, he threw 6 interceptions on 394 passing attempts the entire season. This year, on less than half those attempts, he's already thrown 6 interceptions on 188 attempts, right? And he has an interception in 4 straight games, also has 2 fumbles lost on the season, but it's not just Quinn Ewers, right? I'm not just picking on Quinn Ewers. Outside of Quinn, Arch Manning, multiple turnovers, Jaden Blue, multiple turnovers. There's still 6 more turnovers to account for on this offense. So once again, you have one of the best defenses in the country in terms of forcing turnovers, but you're not taking advantage of it because you're almost giving the ball right back to opposing offenses at the same clip that your defense is giving you the ball, right? 17 turnovers to 14 turnovers committed by the University of Texas. That is absolutely unacceptable. And you've been able to get away with it due to the teams on your schedule, right? When you're playing the corpse of Michigan, the corpse of Oklahoma, Colorado State and teams like that, you can afford to give the ball away and still come back and be efficient on offense and score enough points to win. But when you're playing teams like Georgia, like we saw, right? When you playing some of these teams in the back half of your SEC schedule on the road, when you're in the SEC championship game, when you're in the playoffs, you need to continue to force turnovers, what the defense has done, but then play clean offense and keep the ball, right? Not give the ball away, keep the ball on our side to increase that turnover margin and give us a better chance to win. Quick word from the sponsors, and then we get into the offensive line. A lot of talk about the offensive line the last couple of weeks. We dig into the numbers and see how bad they've been. Have they been bad? And where the areas are for improvement. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, college football fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So that's FanDuel.com. Get in the action today. Bet on your favorite team. All right, so getting into the offensive line, but first I want to talk about the penalties, and most of this is on the offensive line, as we've seen really throughout the season. You know, I don't want to say that this Texas football team is undisciplined. They don't look undisciplined to me, but you know, the numbers are saying that they are somewhat undisciplined, right? Creating a lot of turnovers, committing a lot of turnovers and penalties. So Texas is averaging 7 penalties a game and are 83rd in the country in penalty yardage, 454. 97th in the country with 55 total penalties. Now, some teams have played 7 games and Texas has played 8. So that's a little bit skewed, but nonetheless, they are committing a lot of penalties, right? We saw it against Vanderbilt, over 100 penalty yards. And when you look at Texas opponents, they've committed 47 penalties for 380 yards. So not a huge discrepancy in those 8 games, 8 less penalties, about 75, less yards. Am I doing my math right? Yeah, 74, less yards. I had to look at it. So not a huge discrepancy, and it hasn't necessarily cost them in any game. I don't think they lost the Georgia game because of penalties, but that's something you have to clean up, right? When we talk about being able to stay undefeated in SEC play to make sure you get to the SEC championship game, playing in that game or playing in the playoffs, you can't have these huge penalty discrepancies and then expect to win games at the highest level. And of those 55 penalties, 30 have come in blocking scenarios. So over half of Texas penalties on the year are coming in blocking scenarios when we're trying to make plays on offense. Cam Williams, 10 penalties in 8 games. My Lord, and it's really 11. One of them was, declined or offsetting according to Pro Football Focus. But 10 penalties in 8 games. Sheesh, Cam. They still got him as a first-round pick, but that's something you're going to have to clean up. Good Lord. DJ Campbell, 5 penalties. Kelvin Banks, 5 penalties. Gunnar Helm, at tight end, trying to make plays, 5 penalties. Jake Majors, 3 penalties. Hayden Connor, 2 penalties, right? The offensive line has been entirely, and this is something we saw last year, they have been way too prone to committing penalties, putting this offense behind the chains, and then affecting the efficiency of this offense. I think 55 penalties as a team in 8 games is a lot, but the majority of it has come from the offensive line and Gunnar Helm. Like I said, I don't want to say that this Texas team is undisciplined, but the numbers show when you're in the bottom half as one of the best teams in the country in committing penalties, when your offensive line has committed 30 penalties, including Gunnar Helm, 30 penalties in 8 games, that is undisciplined. Obviously, Kyle Flood knows more about the offensive line, right? He's forgotten more about offensive line play than I'll ever know, right? He's obviously a genius, the man, a maestro, a messiah, right? When it comes to offensive line play and development. But whatever he's teaching them, he needs to clean up, what I'm saying, in terms of the penalties, whether it's, false starts, trying to get a jump too fast, holding, hand placement, whatever. It is going to affect Texas in one of their biggest games of the season when it matters the most if you cannot clean up these penalties. Also, continuing the conversation about the offensive line, Texas quarterbacks have been sacked 17 times this season, 76 in the country, but 11 over the last 2 games, right? 7 against Georgia, 4 against Vanderbilt. We've really seen it become a problem over the last 2 games. Also, just over the last 2 games, right? Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning have been pressured 21 times. That is absolutely ridiculous. This is a unit coming into the season, and after the first 6 weeks, we thought we're the leaders to win the Joe Moore Award for the best offensive line in the country. It has been anything but that the last 2 weeks. 21 pressures against Vanderbilt and Alabama, Georgia. 21 over 10 pressures a game. We have to clean that up. Now, what's interesting is the pressures, they speak for themselves, right? But when you look at the 11 sacks over the last 2 games, only 4 of those have been attributed to players other than the quarterback, right? Now, I don't want to, use this episode as a means of getting on Quinn or certainly being too harsh on him or anything like that. And this is all pro football focused data. So, you have to take it with a grain of salt. There are people just like us sitting down grading what they see and what they believe, right? Will we ever truly know if it's on the offensive line or the quarterback? No, right. But somebody's emboldened enough at Pro Football Focus to put these out and people pay to see it. And that's what we go off of. What they are saying is that 7 of the sacks the last 2 weeks have been on the quarterback. I can't remember if Arch Manning got sacked, right? But 7 of the 11 sacks over the last 2 weeks have been on the quarterback. I don't agree, right? I think that at any rate, if you're getting sacked that much, the offensive line just has to be better. Now, there were some plays, especially in the Georgia game. I know there was one like where Quinn was on the 3-yard line, where he needs to step up in the pocket. He needs to make quicker decisions. He's patting the ball, not having much awareness, and that can lead to sacks, right? There certainly were some plays where the blocking was good enough for Quinn to make a play down the field, and he still got sacked. But you're not going to convince me that 7 of the 11 sacks are on the quarterback over the last couple of weeks. The offensive line has to be better. When we look at the actual data, Kelvin Banks over the last 2 weeks, 1 sack, 2 pressures allowed. Hayden Connor, 0 sacks, but 3 pressures allowed. Jake Majors, 0 sacks, 3 pressures allowed. DJ Campbell, no sacks, 1 pressure allowed over the last 2 weeks. He's actually been really good. Cam Williams, nightmare last 2 weeks, 2 sacks and 9 pressures allowed in just the last 2 games. And then Jaden Blue, right? I guess in pass protection, I had to look this up. He was attributed for a sack on Quinn Ewers over the last couple of weeks, or a sack in the Vandy game against Quinn Ewers. And then when you look at the offensive line grades, I think that where they've really struggled over the last 2 weeks, because like I said, Pro Football Focus is kind of standing on business, right? They're saying that the offensive line for Texas in terms of pass blocking hasn't been bad as people think it is, right? It is Quinn Ewers creating a lot of these sacks. And I'm saying I don't necessarily agree with Pro Football Focus, but there's a lot of people in that building smarter than I am. You know what I'm saying? So they're watching the game from different angles. They're seeing different things than I see. And, they're saying that Quinn Ewers is putting himself in really bad positions while the offensive line hasn't been as bad as we think, just based on the numbers, the sack numbers and the pressures, in terms of pass blocking. But when you look at it, they have taken a step back the last couple of weeks, and it's mostly been in the run blocking area, right? So Cam Williams overall, he just has not been great the last 2 weeks. Overall grades, including run blocking and pass blocking, 49.7 against Georgia and 57.8 against Vanderbilt, both below average. His second and third worst overall grades of the year. His worst was against Michigan, which was surprising, but he did have like 4 penalties in that game alone. And then his 2 worst pass blocking games came against Georgia and Vanderbilt. So Cam Williams over the last 2 weeks has really struggled on the right side. But outside of him, everybody has graded well, at least in terms of pass blocking. The DJ Campbell posted elite pass blocking grades the last 2 weeks, 84.5, 81.1, according to Pro Football Focus. But he has struggled badly in the run game. Against Georgia, 44.6 was his grade in terms of run blocking. Hasn't been the best in run blocking all year, but really over the last 2 weeks, he struggled. Jake Majors, great pass blocking grades once again. 82 against Georgia, 80.5 against Vanderbilt. Those are both elite. But he posted his 2 lowest run blocking grades of the season the last 2 weeks, 59.6 against Georgia, and then took an even bigger step back against Vanderbilt, 47.1. When you look at Hayden Connor, he has posted pretty solid numbers over the last 2 weeks across the board, 67.9 in terms of the running game and 79.4 in the passing game against Georgia. Once again, these are all according to Pro Football Focus. And then 61.3 in terms of the running game and 77.7 in the passing game against Vandy. So Hayden Connor certainly been pretty solid the last couple of weeks. And then when you look at Kelvin Banks against Georgia, 81.7 for the rush and the pass. Now, against Vandy, he was 88.7 for pass blocking. So they're saying that Kelvin Banks, even though it looked like Michael Williams took advantage of him a couple times, Kelvin Banks has been great in terms of pass blocking the last 2 weeks. But against Vanderbilt, only a rushing grade of 48, a run blocking grade of 48. So what we've seen the last couple of weeks, at least according to Pro Football Focus, is they've been able to pass block on the same level, but maybe Quinn Ewers is not having the same pocket awareness he did earlier in the season, which is leading to more sacks. But where the offensive line has struggled and where they've taken a step back over the last couple of weeks is in terms of the run blocking. They have not been as good blocking in terms of the run. It's affected the running game, and they've posted really low numbers the last couple of weeks in terms of their run blocking. So that's where the offensive line, the penalties and the run blocking, I think, at least according to Pro Football Focus, needs to take a huge step forward if Texas wants to get back to dominating the way they were earlier in the season. And the last thing, this is sort of nitpicking, right? I'm talked exclusively about the offense and what they need to do better, because I do think that the defense has been an elite unit this year. We haven't really seen many cracks or chinks in the armor when it comes to this defense. They're forcing turnovers at a high rate, averaging over 2 a game. One of the best pass defenses in the country, really one of the best overall defenses in the country. Even with injuries, they continue to step up and play complementary football and do everything they need to do to put this offense in great positions to succeed. So this is somewhat nitpicking. But Texas is 20th in the country, really good in run defense. Now, compared to third last year, they're not the elite dominant unit they were against the run, but still really good, right? And only allow 3.14 yards per carry, 105 yards per game on the ground, right? Which is really good compared to most teams in college football. But when you look at it, teams have been able to run the ball. Has it been efficient? No, but they've been able to rack up yardage. 5 of the 8 teams Texas has played this season have rushed for over 100 yards, right? It's going to be Georgia, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, UTSA, and Colorado State, and including 3 of the last 4, right? And all 3 SEC teams, you played 3 or 4? No, 3 out of the 4, Oklahoma didn't, but 3 out of the 4 SEC teams you've played have been able to rush for over 100 yards, right? So like I said, it hasn't been super efficient. Georgia was able to run the ball really well. Diego Pavia for Vanderbilt, just because there's so much to defend, he was able to get some good rushing opportunities, rush for almost 70 yards. But when you look at some of the best teams in college football, that's what they're going to do, right? They're going to run the ball, try to control the clock, try to keep this Texas offense off the field, and then create opportunities down the field off of the play action. So once again, it's nitpicking, but I do think that the Texas defense can be a little bit better against the run. Now, because of our offense, we force a lot of teams at the end of the game to pass the ball anyway, but that's just one potential concern moving forward against the best teams in the country. Will you be able to stop them from accumulating yards on the ground and chewing up time of possession? So just some concerns for Texas that we've seen over the last couple of weeks going into the last half of their schedule. Once again, still one of the best teams in the country, still 7-1, the number 6 team in the AP poll, and everything they want to accomplish, SEC championship, national championship, still very much in play for Steve Sarkisian's Texas Longhorns. A quick word from the sponsors, and then we get into Pro Football Focus's latest mock draft. I just paid like $26 for Pro Football Focus, so this entire episode might as well be sponsored by them. But I got to get my money's worth, right? So here we go, Pro Football Focus mock draft after a word from the sponsors. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Some of my favorite features of the Gametime app: priority Gametime Picks creation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. All in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views: get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Panoramic, I probably said that too fast. The lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Gametime ticket coverage: your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, so Pro Football Focus just released a mock draft. This just came out yesterday on Tuesday, October 29th. So it has all 8 games that Texas has played. It's factored all 8 of those in. And we know that this Texas football team has a ton of talent, and they have some first-round talent, right? And so that was accounted for in Trevor Sikkema's latest Pro Football Focus mock draft. Trevor Sikkema has been on Locked On Longhorns. He came on once, I believe, after the Combine. So like after Xavier Worthy ran that 4.21 and everything, I think Trevor Sikkema was on that week. So really smart guy, So when we look at the Pro Football Focus mock draft, right, obviously he did the first round, first 32 players off the board. First player whom we would all expect, right, best player on the team, most consistent player on the team, Kelvin Banks. He has him at number 9 overall, going to the Miami Dolphins, the first offensive tackle off the board. And I think this just makes a ton of sense, right? When you look at it, the offensive line, for Miami has not been the best. I don't think that they're the reason that Tua has suffered all of these concussions. But, when Tua, you've paid him all of that money, they clearly look like a different team without him. You need to provide him the best blocking possible and make sure that your biggest investment of your franchise can stay upright and continue to win games for the Miami Dolphins. And what better way to do that than to grab the best offensive tackle in the draft? And they're talking about he can play tackle or guard. I mean, I've seen what he's done the last 3 years at tackle. I think he's a tackle, but nonetheless, he would be an asset to that Miami Dolphins offensive line to help keep Tua Tagovailoa upright and out of that medical team, right? And then Cam Williams, the next player off the board for Texas, number 17 overall to the San Francisco 49ers offensive tackle, number 3. Like, I know Cam Williams has struggled over the last couple of weeks, but when you look at that size and his movement ability, I mean, he could be a dominant offensive tackle for a decade in the National Football League. And then he can go to the San Francisco 49ers, where not only is Trent Williams getting older, but when you look at that offensive line, the pieces they've lost, it feels like Trent Williams and everybody else, right? And I just think that if you can develop, Cam Williams and really turn him into a guy that's 6'5", 6'6", 350 pounds, that can move, that can pull, that can do everything you want to do on that offensive line, especially in that run blocking scheme. I mean, he's going to be hell for people to deal with. That running game is already hell for people to deal with. You add a playmaker, a playmaker on the offensive line like Cam Williams, and it could really take San Francisco to the next level. So they have him going number 17 overall and the number 3 offensive tackle off the board. Isaiah Bond at number 25 overall. I haven't really seen him over the last couple of weeks, but still one of the most explosive playmakers in college football. They have him going number 25 to the Pittsburgh Steelers, the 5th wide receiver off the board. Makes a ton of sense when you look at that passing game. It's like George Pickens, Pat Fryer moved in terms of tight end, but they really don't have a bunch of wide receivers that put fear in you, right? And Isaiah Bond can come in right away, take the top off the defense, and then really develop into a complete wide receiver next to George Pickens for the future of what's a really good Pittsburgh team, right? They're 6-2. Whether it's going to be Justin Fields or Russell Wilson at quarterback, they certainly have a formula for winning games. I think Isaiah Bond can add a lot of explosiveness to what has been, kind of a defense and run the football first team. What's interesting is those are the 3 players listed as first-round picks for Texas in Pro Football Focus's latest mock draft that just came out yesterday. The one notable name I did not mention is Quinn Ewers, right? And Quinn Ewers came back to the University of Texas to kind of solidify himself as a first-round pick in this year's draft. Now, this is a mock draft. This doesn't mean that, Quinn Ewers won't go first, won't go in the first round. But I do think it's interesting that his name was not mentioned at all. And so when you look at Quinn Ewers' performance, not just the last couple of weeks, but over the entire season, has he looked like a first-round pick to you? Do you think he's one of the 32 best players in college football? Do you think an NFL franchise should select Quinn Ewers right now to be the face of their franchise and be their quarterback of the future? That all remains to be seen, right? I don't get paid to make those decisions. We'll see what happens in April, but certainly interesting that we're seeing mock drafts at this point in the season without Quinn Ewers in the first round. And they did have 4 quarterbacks going in the first round. Quinn Ewers was not one of them. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.